Spartans were by law not allowed to retreat, a phrase not only commonly stated by historians, but also frequently portrayed in pop culture, such as Zack Snyder's movie 300. In this movie about the heroic Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, Leonidas and his 300 ultimately commit collective suicide as a sacrifice for their country. In the following scene, they were just told that they are encircled by the Persians. They could still flee and retreat, but Leonidas tells his fellow Spartans the following.
No retreat, no surrender. That is Spartan law. And by Spartan law, we will stand and fight and die.
This scene from the movie might actually reflect a somewhat legit fact, since our ancient sources also tell us that Leonidas could have retreated but chose not to. Interestingly, and contrary to popular belief, many parts of the movie have some grounding in the ancient source material. For example, the issue about not retreating is also present in a book called Histories by Herodotus, an ancient author who wrote around 430 BC. Additionally, there's a famous inscription which supports the point about these laws. In fact, you might recognize it from the movie as well. Here's the English translation of the inscription.
Go tell the Spartans, passerby, that here, by Spartan law, we lie.
But which laws are actually referred to? Were the Spartans really forbidden to retreat, even tactically? Unquestionably, this would be an odd practice for a successful military state such as Sparta. Hence, we'd like to investigate this issue a little further by examining 3 battles to get to the bottom of the Spartan retreat laws. In the following, we will present a line of argument for the existence of no retreat laws in Sparta in the first part of the video. Then, in the second part, we will challenge this argumentation. Our story starts with Leonidas and his 300 who fought at the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. Ever since the movie 300, it is well known that he died at the battlefield of Thermopylae in the course of the Greco-Persian Wars. Because the writing of history only really starts between the 430s and 420s BC, not many sources actually exist for Leonidas' death at Thermopylae. The view that he died there because he was not allowed to retreat by law can be traced to 2 ancient sources, the author Herodotus and the short inscription I just mentioned. This inscription was put up to honor the dead Greeks who died at Thermopylae in 480. But let us first look at the account of Herodotus. He explicitly states that, quote, Leonidas felt it not fitting for himself and the Spartans to desert that post which they had come to defend at the beginning. Herodotus' piece was often juxtaposed with the inscription. Historians for ancient history often believe their sources too quickly if they find 2 different ones, which seem to claim the same thing. The short inscription and the account of Herodotus were seen as sufficient evidence for the interpretation that Spartans did not retreat because of their laws. Immediately after Herodotus references the before mentioned inscription, he continues his narrative by telling the following story. He talks about 2 Spartans out of the 300 who had problems with their vision. Herodotus describes that their capabilities in battle were restricted. One of them, Eurytus, had his slave lead him into battle despite his problems, so he could die a glorious death. The other, Aristodemus, retreated to Sparta. For this he was condemned and called a Tresas, a trembler. Herodotus knew another such story about Pantites, who was officially sent away from battle as a messenger, but he too was condemned in the same way as Aristodemus. This may tell us that retreating Spartans had to expect a very cold welcome back home. Or at least, this is what some historians inferred from these stories. Regardless of what the law actually said, it looks like the Spartans despised retreat. We have to bear in mind that Sparta was considered a military state in antiquity. The sources show Sparta as a society in which everybody lived for the sole purpose to enable the Spartans to be professional warriors. This is an assumption that was really popular in ancient times. The whole Spartan community, beginning with the educational system, which all male Spartans had to pass through from the 7th to the 20th year of age, to the lifestyle of the Spartan adults, was oriented towards an idealized warriorhood. According to this, the Spartans were full-time professional warriors, and their whole society was laid out to increase the effectiveness of their military strategies, the hoplite tactics. Hence, a Spartan who retreated was condemned by the collective. In this light, it is not surprising that Pantites was bullied so badly that he eventually hanged himself, while Aristodemus tried to redeem himself at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC, just 1 year after Leonidas' death in 480. In this battle, the Greeks managed to defeat the Persians for good. As for Aristodemus, he ran into the enemy battle line and committed a calculated form of public suicide. Still, his status was not redeemed properly afterwards. So to sum this first part up, those who believe that the Spartans had specific laws against retreating in battle cite Herodotus and the famous inscription. It seems valid to say that the Spartans were not allowed to retreat. If they did so anyway, then their destiny was to be condemned as a Tresas, a trembler, just like Aristodemus and Pantites. So how can one even challenge this interpretation? Well, let's dig a little deeper into the historical sources. In 479 BC, only 1 year after Leonidas' death at Thermopylae, the Greeks fought one last battle against the Persians, in which they finally defeated them. According to Herodotus, a Persian emissary was sent to the Greeks before battle. He mocked the Greeks, especially the Spartans, telling them that they should instantly attack the Persian forces. The Spartan laws, the emissary said, wouldn't allow them to retreat anyway. So why not die in a pointless attack like Leonidas did 1 year earlier? Obviously, this speech is totally made up by Herodotus. These kinds of things were usually not reported on the battlefield in the first place. But more importantly, Herodotus wrote 50 years after the event and relied on oral sources. He could definitely not have known what the emissary had said. Herodotus simply put words in the emissary's mouth to increase the tension of his narrative. This is actually a common thing among ancient historiographers, so nothing to dwell upon. But, surprisingly, the Spartan commander, mocked by the Persian emissary, did decide to return to camp instead of attacking. There, he held a council of war. Very un-Spartan-like indeed. Ultimately, the Greeks decided to retreat because their water sources had been poisoned by the Persians. The retreat irritated one of the Spartan sergeants, Amampharatos, greatly. According to Herodotus, Amampharatos was offended of this un-Spartan-like behavior, so he refused to retreat with the other Spartans. The Spartan general thus led his troops retreat very slowly, to let Amampharatos enough time to change his mind, which he did in the end. The reason why he did that is crucial, and may tell us a lot about Spartan retreat strategies. Because Amampharatos was on guard duty during the Greeks' council of war, he was not informed about the retreat. He did not know that the reason for retreating was in fact tactical, and not because they wanted to flee. Once he knew what was going on, he had no problem whatsoever to retreat as well. Generally speaking, it looks like retreating was not a problem at all for Spartans. Amampharatos' story tells us that it is not the act of tactically retreating per se that is problematic, but rather fleeing from battle that would be condemned. Thus, to sum this second part up, there was a lot of pragmaticism in the Spartans' understanding of tactics, which implies that they were not forbidden to retreat. Instead, it is far more likely that these no-retreat laws only concerned flight from battle, rather than the act of tactical retreat itself. This means that Leonidas, 1 year earlier, actually would have had the option to retreat without a problem. Let us look at another example, which hammers our point home. Even if the Spartans handled retreat quite pragmatically, there was a popular contemporary perception that Spartans generally never retreated. For example, Thucydides, a major Athenian historiographer of the 4th century, records that for him, it was one of the greatest surprises to see a Spartan contingent surrender in the year 425 BC at the Battle of Sphacteria. During this time, Athens and Sparta were at war with each other. He tells the story as follows. 8 less than 300 Spartans were encircled by the Athenians. Thucydides compares this scene directly with the Battle of Thermopylae. Even though Thucydides generally writes about strategies and tactics, he evokes the image of the heroic 300 Spartans. He addresses the issue of honor during military endeavors multiple times. And he even says that the Spartans were allowed to send messengers to their government to ask how they should handle this situation. And they were simply told to act to their best and just be brave. Well, the Spartans on Sphacteria surrendered anyways. So it seems that the Athenians simply believed that the Spartans would never retreat, while for the Spartans, it didn't seem a big deal at all. What is most interesting is that this scene at Sphacteria occurs at the time when Herodotus wrote his histories. So he writes about the Spartans not retreating, while actually they did exactly that multiple times during his lifespan. In this slide, it seems obvious that something must have gone wrong in Herodotus' book. The Spartans retreated and surrendered multiple times, and it was never a problem. So why would it have been a problem for the 300 at the Battle of Thermopylae? Considering all this, the only viable conclusion is that the mentioned laws do not refer to tactical retreat whatsoever. And it would definitely have been a tactical retreat for Leonidas. And again, this is first and foremost an indication for the Spartans' pragmatic understanding of their retreat tactics. Secondly, it is a sign that the Athenians viewed the Spartans differently than the Spartans actually were. Generally, we only have the external Athenian view on Spartan society. This is a major difficulty when dealing with ancient Sparta. We have no views from within Sparta at all. Thus, we need to deconstruct the external views and find inconsistencies in their argumentation. Otherwise, we do fall prey to their biases. In this case, the inconsistency is rather obvious. Athenians thought Spartans did not retreat nor surrender, but they actually did that quite often. So why did the Athenians think that? Historians agree that much of this is due to the general myth about Sparta. They argue that Sparta used their victory at Thermopylae and Leonidas' death as a propagandistic means to stage themselves as a superior warrior society and defender of the entire Greek community. Ever since then, many sources portray the Spartans as idealized warriors who do not retreat at all. But the very same sources also state that Spartans did retreat and are thus inherently contradicting. Generally speaking, this means that Leonidas' alleged act of bravery was already mythicized in antiquity itself. It was used by the Spartans to further their propagandistic agenda and to legitimize their power political aspirations within the Greek alliances. Thus, we never have a clear-cut view on Leonidas nor Sparta. We only ever have the biased Athenian version of the story. The evidence at hand simply does not support the position that the Spartans never retreated nor surrendered. But why then did the 300 movie and many historians believe that these no retreat laws existed? Well, as simple as it may sound, but much of it goes back to a translation error. The translation of the word law is ambiguous. The ancient Greek word rhemata means more something along the line of words and not law. The proper term referring to laws would be nomoi, as in today's word astronomy, the laws of the star and planets and so on. The inscription dedicated to the 300 Spartans was abused as an exemplum during the course of history and often mistranslated. So much so that even the Nazi Germans used it to legitimize the sacrifice of their encircled soldiers in Stalingrad in 1943. We laid out this issue in our other video about Spartan myth if you're interested. So to sum this video up, the inscription at the battlefield of Thermopylae and Herodotus' account were used to postulate the existence of no retreat laws in ancient Sparta. This was usually connected with the stories of the two tremblers, Aristodemus and Pantites. The inscription was misinterpreted because of a translation error, while Herodotus himself is very ambiguous in his account. He states that Leonidas was not allowed to retreat, but at the same time he explains us that the Spartans retreated on many other occasions, especially at the Battle of Plataea, which was 1 year after Leonidas' death. Furthermore, the two tremblers actually do not constitute evidence for no retreat laws. They only show that if individual Spartans abandoned their comrade in arms, then they would be condemned as tremblers. It was never the case that whole contingents of Spartan soldiers were condemned. The story of Amompharatos at the Battle of Plataea suggests that the Spartans had no problem retreating, but may have had rules against flight from the battle line, which are two completely different things. And lastly, Thucydides' account of the Battle of Sphacteria proves that the Spartans had no problem surrendering whatsoever. And in addition, Thucydides demonstrates exemplarily the major difficulties when dealing with Sparta, namely that we only have an external point of view on Spartan society, and that already the earliest available sources have a distorted perception on Sparta.